Hello, I'm Manny Varela, Business Relationship Manager at DevOps Institute. Welcome to the Ask the Author webinar. Thank you for joining us today. It looks like we have a full house of attendees from all around the globe, and we're excited to have you all here today. We are pleased and delighted to have Marc Hornbeek here today, author of the DOI DevOps Test Engineering course. The DevOps Test Engineering course is part of DOI's DevOps Practitioner line of courses. So let's get started with Marc Hornbeek. Marc, glad to have you on board today. How are you doing today?
Hey, Manny. Thanks for having me for this webinar. And I just want to give a shout out to the DOI team. I know Ingrid and you had a lot to do with putting the webinar together, and Jane Grohl, the CEO of the DevOps Institute, is on the line with us, and we'll have some words to say later in this presentation. But I wanted to thank you very much for having me on board. I'll get started. Basically, I'm going to introduce, what is this course all about and the rationale and why you might be interested to take a closer look at the DevOps Test Engineering course. Personally, I've been involved in DevOps and test and quality assurance and automation things for much of my career, and so I'm very passionate about this topic of DevOps and testing. And what I often find is testing is kind of the undersung portion of DevOps. It's kind of assumed, but in reality, it's a very critical part of DevOps. I like to say that, without DevOps, there really is without testing, there's really no continuous delivery, because testing provides many of the artifacts and verdicts that are used to judge the completeness of each of the stages of the DevOps pipeline, and finally the release, qualification prior to release and deployment, and even after release. So testing is vital to DevOps and continuous delivery. DevOps requires careful engineering, but testing requires a great deal of engineering as well. A lot of folks take testing for granted, but in reality, there's a lot to it. If you consider testing is all the way from design through to deployment, so it's not just a matter of automating a few tests and running them at some point during the pipeline. Testing is certainly not just a phase of the DevOps pipeline. It's throughout the pipeline, and this course really emphasizes that. It talks about how testing is really part of the end-to-end DevOps pipeline, and it covers a lot of different aspects of how you can optimize testing and optimize teams. There's a lot of concern from some of the quality-oriented folks about whether or not testing plays a role in DevOps, and of course it really does, and how their personal involvement is how do they engage with DevOps is also part of what this course covers. So the course includes material for a wide range of topics, and everything from team aspects of DevOps through to the mechanics and operations. So the idea of the course is that it's not just for QA engineers, although I think a lot of QA engineers are curious about how they fit in the DevOps world. With DevOps, testing is part of everybody's job because quality is part of everyone's job. One of the challenges with DevOps is that the cycle times are faster for testing, and for everything from builds through to deployment. The time to execute tests tends to be faster and faster as the DevOps implementation becomes more and more optimized. So how can you test faster and still get good quality is a conundrum, and that's really what this course teaches, is how can you optimize testing and still get really good quality and a stable result consistently. And it applies to not only the traditional QA folks, but also to the developers and ops people, and site reliability engineers, managers, QA people. So the roles of different people involved in DevOps covered in the course, And as I mentioned, it covers all aspects from culture, team, testing strategies. How do you work with infrastructure for testing? They need to be elastic in order to be able to spin up large test environments when needed, or collapse them when large test environments are not needed, depending on the content that is cycling through the pipeline at any one point in time. It also covers infrastructure tools, how to integrate test frameworks with the DevOps backbone frameworks, which tools are applicable depending on what kind of tests are being done, some of the best practices for testing, how to integrate test automation, how test automation can be optimized for the pipeline, what to do with test results, how to manage tests, and how to best analyze tests so that all the entire end-to-end pipeline can be optimized. Just a word about the DevOps Institute itself. I'm proud to be a contributor to the DevOps Institute. It's a global learning community for DevOps practices. Very comprehensive suite of training available. The DevOps Institute was launched only 2 years ago in 2015. Already it's operating through global channels in 25 countries. The DevOps Institute provides professional training that's delivered through registered education partners, and the training programs are also available in the certification format. So if someone takes DOI training, they can be certified if they pass the exams. A little word about myself. I'm a principal consultant of DevOps within the DevOps practice at Trace3. I'll give a few words about Trace3 on the next slide, but I mentioned before I'm passionate about testing. Over my career, I've spent more than 39 years, mostly in engineering roles and also management roles, often related to engineering solutions for IT infrastructures. I'm a speaker at a number of DevOps events. Generally, I talk about things like lab as a service, continuous test automation, and automation of engineering processes. I'm a blogger on DevOps.com on similar topics, and as you know, I'm an author for the DevOps Institute, this test engineering course. Also, I'm authoring the Continuous Delivery Architect course. I'm a member of the IEEE, and still reeling from the fact that I was awarded Most Outstanding Engineer by the IEEE Western United States for contributions in the field of automation applied to development testing of networks, systems, protocols, labs, and DevOps. Trace3 is my employer, and Trace3 is a transformative IT authority. We're essentially a consulting company and value-added reseller and multi-systems integration company. We support customers in the Fortune 500 enterprise market with IT solutions. Generally speaking, we get involved when our customers have complex IT requirements and a need to put together solutions at the enterprise level. And I'm certainly part of the DevOps practice of Trace3. Trace3 has other practice areas such as data migration services, security, big data, various other things. We also offer a conference each year, one coming up called Evolve in May. So one of the key things of this course is really teaching is what's really the difference between DevOps testing and traditional testing. And the differences are many and varied, and that's why I think this course is important. People think of DevOps testing as just, oh, we just automate things so it'll be faster. That sounds good, but in reality, how do you actually do that? And who does it? And what do you do with the results? There's a variety of issues involved in order to really make it work. How do you make tests go faster? How do you make sure you're working with the right tests at the right time and giving the results to the right people depending on what those test results are? It also teaches about how to actually implement some of the tenets of DevOps testing. I think a lot of people have heard of the idea of shifting left. What does that really mean in the context of DevOps testing, and what can you do about it? Similarly, other tenets like fail often, fail early, test faster, and relevance. These are 5 tenets that I think a lot of folks associate with DevOps testing, but what does it really mean, and how can you actually accomplish it? What changes do you need to make to your tooling, to your infrastructure, to your teams, to the practices, and not only within, let's say, a QA organization, but across the board, across the entire organization, to make it really work properly for an entire enterprise, or at least a business unit. So traditional QA automation primarily focuses on the idea of independent testing, where there are independent testers working on validating products that were delivered by the development team, and the ops teams are often not very involved at all, and they're looking at the end results perhaps during acceptance testing. But with DevOps, that's not good enough. Everybody from dev through to ops has to be intimately involved in defining what the criteria are for testing in order to have a release that can be deployed with confidence and yet quickly. So everybody has to be involved. So that's just an example of how things are different. So the tests have to be engineered strategically. It's not good enough to simply say, well, we have to do, test everything all the time. When there are so many changes going through the pipeline, the tests have to be carefully selected depending on what changes are going through the pipeline at any point in time, and the results have to be steered in the right direction depending on what those results are. So that's part of what the course teaches. It's the combination of short increments and spreading of tests across the end-to-end pipeline in a strategic way so that you can keep up with the speed of DevOps. And so automation is part of that, but there are other practices involved in order to make that really work properly. Practices such as coordination of the tests across an aggregate set of test runs, sessions, and end-to-end verdict assessments. The course itself, I think, is really important. What I find working with a lot of clients is they really haven't got test automation to the level that's necessary to properly implement DevOps, so that's often a critical success factor when implementing DevOps. The maturity of their testing and how well the organization really understands the subtleties of test engineering for DevOps is a key critical success factor for DevOps overall. Just talking to your buddies may not be enough unless they're truly experts in DevOps testing. So that's why I think this course has a lot to offer to anyone involved in DevOps. If you're not already a DevOps testing expert, or if you don't have access to one readily, then I think this course can offer a lot to just help you understand what really are the best practices, how really can you integrate testing properly into the end-to-end pipeline from design through to deployment and even beyond. So at this point, I'm going to turn over the talk to Jane Grohl, the CEO of the DevOps Institute, and Jane is going to be telling us more about the course itself and some of the other reasons why I think why she thinks the course may be valuable to you and how to approach it. Hey, Jane, are you there?
I am, Mark. Hi, and welcome everyone. Very excited to hear more about the reasoning behind our course, and of course sharing Mark's expertise regarding the difference between traditional testing and DevOps testing. And part of the reasoning behind DevOps Institute working with the subject matter experts such as Marc is the recognition that in today's environment, testing is a very critical success skill, not only for the individual, whether you're a developer, operations person, or a tester, but for organizational agility. So I want to talk a little bit about why this course is important. Prior to the beginning of this session, we polled some of the attendees to find out their levels of maturity, and the results were very, very interesting. We found that more than half of the attendees had no concept of DevOps automation in the testing arena. They weren't using automated testing yet. We found out that training was happening much more on a organic or tribal level, where knowledge was either being shared mentor to mentor, or testers who were looking to evolve into more of a faster paced environment were self-studying. And we recognize that there really aren't very many learning opportunities for DevOps testing. And so at DOI, we've been looking at competency training and looking at new skills for a modern age. And so we know that DevOps test engineering best practices are not really well known, but we also know, as Marc shared, that DevOps testing is critical to the success of DevOps programs. And whether you call it DevOps or you call it end-to-end IT or you call it organizational agility, the need to be able to shift left and being able to apply tests much earlier in the development cycle makes a lot of sense. Testing provides data or verdicts that are critical to the assessment of results in every stage of the DevOps pipeline. And as Marc said, those pipelines, those increments happen very, very quickly. So if we're going to rely on new testing strategies, instill good testing skills in all IT professionals at different levels, and then engage automation, that's going to be the best way for us to be able to assess the results at every stage of the pipeline, whether it's very early in the stage or closer to deployment. Many roles, as Marc said, have to now acquire skills that they might not have needed before, and testing is certainly one of them. You start to look at the evolution of everything in IT being as code, whether it's infrastructure as code or security as code, platforms as code, then if everything is going to be code, code needs to be tested. And so the skills that are required not only from the QA folks, and again, this is an evolution for them, but also from the development and operations and security teams, this now requires that there are new ways of doing things and new skills that need to be acquired for the modern age. And as I said, we really did some research on this and determined that there are very, very few learning opportunities for formal DevOps testing and how to leverage all of the new capabilities and all of the emerging practices for the benefit of organizational agility. So the goal of this course is first to understand the purpose and benefits and differences of DevOps testing, including the concepts, the principles, the terminology, that some of which, of course, is brought from the past, some of which honors the past, and much of it brings us into the future. Really understanding the best practices of DevOps teams and strategies, looking at infrastructure, looking at tools and automation, test management, of course, and test analysis. Part of the goal of the course is also to bring real-life scenarios. There's a case study that's been embedded into the course, but to be able to look at testing both from a practical and from a skill or competency-based perspective. If you are a project management professional or have a credential that requires ongoing or continuing education, then attendees of this course through your registered education partner would be able to earn 16 professional development units. And there's an exam, there's a certification exam, a certificate, and a digital badge that accompanies the course as well, and I'll speak to that on the next slide. So while the course is called DevOps Test Engineering, that's a nod to the fact that engineering spans the entire IT spectrum. But on an individual basis, the individual learner wants to be able to achieve the certification, and the certification is as a DevOps test engineer. And as we've now said many times, being a DevOps test engineer is equally appropriate to a developer as it is to a QA tester or QA manager, as it is to an operations person. There is a prerequisite, and so the prerequisite for entering this exam or any of the other DevOps Practitioner Series competency-based courses is the DevOps Foundation certificate. So take the DevOps Foundation course, earn the certificate, and that is the prerequisite to enter this course and to take this exam. The exam is accredited by the DevOps Institute, but it is delivered through our strategic examination partner, PeopleCert. And so there are multiple opportunities for taking the exam once you've sat the course, including having a trainer as a proctor or an online proctor. And so there's more about that from your registered education partner. It is a multiple choice exam with 40 multiple choice questions, but because the complexity of the questions now increases as we dive deeper into specific topics like testing, the time for the exam is now expanded to 90 minutes. It is currently available only in English, but if English is not your first language, then we grant you some extra time and the ability to bring an English translation dictionary into the examination room. The material covers what's known as Bloom's 1, 2, and 3 questions. So Bloom's 1 is the ability to understand, so to understand what the terminology is, the concepts are, and to be able to recite that back and select the right answer in a Bloom's 1 question. Bloom's 2 is you could see the concept in context. So it might be a very short scenario, and it's asking you as a candidate to be able to identify the correct answer using that concept in a context. But Bloom's 3 is about application, the ability to apply your knowledge. So the scenario may get a little bit bigger, a little bit deeper, a little bit more complex, and the answers will look for how would you apply this concept or how would you apply this testing strategy in that particular situation. In order to achieve the certification, you must pass at 65%, so 26 correct questions out of 40. And upon passing, you will not only be issued a certificate, but the image on the screen represents the digital badge that you will be able to claim and display on your social media, your signature on your email, your business cards, and you will be designated as a DevOps test engineer. So the course was built based on what we call a collective body of knowledge. Unlike some of the other frameworks, DevOps is not being built on a single body of knowledge. And at DevOps Institute, we actually don't support the creation of a single body of knowledge. DevOps touches too many aspects of IT management and technical capabilities to be pigeonholed into a single publication or a single library. So we advocate the use of a collective body of knowledge, and the next slide will demonstrate a little bit of that. But many of the sources that were used to build this course that Marc relied upon were really extracted from real-life best practices in DevOps testing. We know that many of the practices that are emerging in DevOps are emerging because real organizations are doing real things. And so part of our role and part of Marc's role is to be able to research and observe those and then be able to share them through our courseware and through our certification. The DevOps Test Engineering course, we call it DTE, is really based on the concept that DevOps testing is not the same as other testing methodologies, but incorporates or evolves many of the best practices from frameworks such as Waterfall or Agile or IT service management. So it is honoring and adapting the past, but it's also incorporating future forward capabilities to increase flow. And it is designed to teach the key differences and the practices for engineering testing in a very fast-paced DevOps environment. So let's talk a little bit about this collective body of knowledge. So part of our role at DevOps Institute is to really examine the landscape and identify where are the bodies of knowledge or pockets of knowledge that are available about DevOps. And the interesting thing about DevOps, as I said, it isn't a single body of knowledge or a single library, but it's built on multiple publications. It's built on blog sites like DevOps.com. It's built on DevOps Day conferences, DevOps Enterprise Summit conferences, and then the variety of blogs, articles, videos, case studies that are emerging about DevOps. And out of that comes themes. We start to see practices that are delivering real value, that are consistent from organization to organization, and then relying on subject matter expertise from experts such as Marc so that we can collect those emerging practices, convert them into best practices, and be able to speak about value creation through many of these competencies. So is this course right for you? Well, you know, as we've said many times, Marc shared it earlier in the session, and I'm sharing with you now, testing is no longer just something that happens downstream, right? Somewhere between development and operations, testing occurs. The goal of DevOps is to be able to instill testing or test-driven environment from the first line of code through deployment and beyond. So if you are any of these roles, software engineers, systems engineers, QA testers, I know many of you on today's session are coming from the QA arena, infrastructure engineers, project managers, these are the types of roles that need to acquire the new skills and at least understand testing strategies, be able to analyze and read test plans, and even be able to author some of the test strategies and some of the test management in order to provide value from idea through creation and up to your customers. So the course is available now. And please consult your registered education partner for their course schedules and logistics. DevOps Institute is very proud that we work through a very, very large channel of registered education partners. Right now, I believe we're in 25 different countries. And so we're hoping that if you've already taken DevOps Foundation, please consult your registered education partner for more information about their schedule for DevOps Test Engineering and the other DevOps Practitioner courses. If you don't currently have a registered education partner, then please go to the DevOpsInstitute.com website and review our directory. It is isolated by region. So, you know, as I've kind of alluded to, there are multiple courses in the DevOps Practitioner series. They're not sequential, so it's not meant that you take one and you build on it. They really are competency-based. DevOps Foundation is the prerequisite for all of them. Agile Service Manager and Certified Agile Process Owner are available today, as is DevOps Foundation and DevOps Test Engineering. But in the next few months, we're going to be releasing more of the DevOps Practitioner series, including Continuous Delivery Architect, which Marc has mentioned that he is the author for that as well. For those of you in the security space, DevSecOps Engineer will be releasing in June. And then for anyone that's involved in the cultural transformation associated with DevOps, we're introducing a DevOps Leader practitioner course as well. So stay tuned. In the fall, we're very excited about offering a course and a certification for site reliability engineering. And so that's, to my mind, more of the ops piece of DevOps, and there'll be more news coming about that very, very soon. But if you take nothing away from this slide, please know that everything that we're building at DevOps Institute is really based on competencies, right? New competencies for a modern age. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Manny. And Manny, I'm hoping that we have some good questions from our audience.
Yes, thank you all. Great presentation, Marc and Jane. This is going to be a popular course for sure, DevOps Test Engineering. We've been getting quite a bit of response for it. So I do have a few questions here, and I'll start off with one from Peter. What are some of the key differences between DevOps testing engineering, and other forms of software testing? I guess this would be for Marc.
Okay. Thanks for the question, Peter. Yeah, I think I talked about some of those items during the session already, but just to kind of recap and put a point on it. Traditional QA testing, generally speaking, is the idea of having an independent tester working with development. After development feels that, you know, the feature is written and ready for testing, whereas DevOps testing is a much more integral effort where, you know, testing is done together with development. So just one example of how that works. For best practices DevOps environments, the tests are written together with the code. In fact, in some cases ahead of the code if you follow the, you know, test-driven development methodology, which is not necessary, but it's a good idea. But for the most part, tests are available by the time the code is checked into trunk. So automated tests are available during the continuous integration process after check into trunk, and they're used during that initial pass through the pipeline. So that's an important difference in terms of best practice. The other major factor is just the amount of time there is for testing. So strategy where you might have, you know, a long time to test, let's say longevity or capacity or things, that has to be integrated strategically across the pipeline rather than just one big phase. So testing is no longer just a big phase in, you know, a waterfall type of process. It's instead integrated in snippets across the pipeline, and tests are chosen strategically according to what's changing in the pipeline. So, and at the end, you still have to have confidence that what's being delivered is sufficient to assure stability and quality. So aggregating results across a series of test sessions is important for DevOps, and maybe not quite as important if you have independent testing where all the testing is kind of lumped together in larger groups. Those are just a couple of differences. Okay, next question.
Great, thanks, Mark. Great answer. I've got another one here from Tim. Given that you can run continuous testing, does this allow you to focus on different types of testing and various stages in development, like unit versus system testing?
Yeah, certainly. The testing includes not only functional testing and regression testing, but all the different types of tests. I think probably the types of tests are the same for, you know, traditional QA testing or DevOps testing, but continuous testing means that you're choosing which of those tests to do at any one point in time in the pipeline, depending on what's important. So if there's a change going through the pipeline that is likely to break the build, then you're probably going to run all of the unit tests thoroughly, because, you know, build-related tests are going to be needed to validate the entire build, and usually you do run them anyway. But, you know, let's say static analysis tests, you might choose the checkers that are most relevant according to what is changed. Certainly on the regression side, and things like capacity testing or compliance or conformance, you know, during continuous testing, you would make sure that you're choosing those particular tests at the particular stage that's relevant for, you know, according to the change. So continuous is an important word for DevOps. And what's interesting, I think, is testing is kind of the only thing really that's truly continuous about continuous delivery pipeline, because, you know, integration, deployment, delivery, those things depend on testing, so they're, if you like, interrupted by testing. Whereas testing itself can in fact be continuous. So you're constantly, you know, in the best practices DevOps environment, choosing to run some tests. There's never really enough tests, so you might as well, you know, make sure you're running some tests with the resources you have to get the best possible result by the time you get to the end of the pipeline. Hope that answers the question.
Okay, great. And kind of a related question here from John. If shifting testing left, does that mean there should be fewer stages in the pipeline, or are tests repeated in multiple stages?
Yeah, so shifting left is an important concept with DevOps and continuous delivery. The idea is just that you try to run the most relevant tests as early as possible in the pipeline. It doesn't mean that you skip stages in the pipeline, though. The stages are chosen for good reason, right? You're not going to run integration after deployment or something. So, you know, generally speaking, the pipeline involves some development and then some integration, and then, you know, some packaging, and then acceptance and delivery, and even post-delivery there may be some tests in the form of, you know, A/B testing or green-blue testing or canary testing. So, yeah, so some of those tests may make sense to repeat as the configurations change. You try to do as many representative configurations in, let's say, pre-flight testing during development before integration, but you can't test every possible configuration. And as you go through the pipeline, generally speaking, the types of data, the variations in the infrastructure and deployment configurations get exercised along the way. So the same tests might be run throughout the pipeline, but usually in a smart environment, you try to run at least each test in each of the relevant configurations throughout the pipeline.
Great, fantastic. Sounds like we have, looks like we have one more, time for one more question here. So I'll combine one here from Andrew and from Hector, and respectively operations and development persons. Why should I attend this course from an operations and developer standpoint?
That's a really important question, because I get it a lot. A lot of developers really haven't, in engineering school, you don't hear a lot about testing. And I think a lot of us, when we went through engineering school, thought that our job was to design things, but testing didn't come up that much. And then we get on, in a job, and we find out there's this thing called QA tester. And you think, well, okay, that confirms that it's not part of my job. And unfortunately, that's a concept that really doesn't apply when you get into DevOps. In fact, it really doesn't need to apply even before DevOps. But the general idea is testing is part of development, and it is something that you need to validate everything you're doing before deployment, and you can't just depend on some third party to do that work. Certainly different organizations handle it differently, but for the most part, it works best if everybody's collaborating on deciding what are the right tasks and who should run them depending on their skill sets and aptitudes and availability. That's true not only for the developers, but also the ops people. Ops people have a tremendously important role to make sure that the tests that are planned to be run do include tests that are representative of what ops is looking for before they would agree to deploy something, or after deployment, what they think is important from an end user, customer, and operations point of view. So certainly Dev, QA, and Ops altogether have a vital role. And yet Ops and Dev in particular generally don't have a lot of formal training with DevOps testing, or testing in general. This is where this course, I think, has a lot of value, just to really get everybody on the same page. Even just having a group of folks that maybe even from the same organization working together in a course like this can be valuable to help establish some common terminology and practices that they can then take home and really implement a really solid and efficient optimized DevOps pipeline.
Great, excellent questions, everyone. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jane. That's all we have time for today. Great presentations. This session has been recorded, and we will be presenting it via the DevOps Institute's YouTube channel in a few days. So keep a lookout for that email with a link. And again, thank you for joining the Ask the Author presentation today. And if you have any questions, please contact us about the DevOps Test Engineering course and any of the other courses on our catalog. Thanks, and have a great day.